Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at some 1980s firefighting cards. And this is cool. There's a few different sets in here, so we'll go kind of year by year. Not a whole lot in total. I thought it'd be really fun to check out what firefighting was like in the 80s and what these cards were all about. So first up, these are 1981 from KF Burns Entertainment, and this is Venting a Flaming Roof. Let me see if I should back up a little bit so we get a clear view. And it's not a 9 to 5 job. Then it talks about the working conditions. There's a quiz, a little more information about fire prevention, the photo credit. So, a very cool set of cards. 4th of July parade using the old pumper and apparatus. And firehouses were always a very big part of the community. You pretty much knew who your local firefighters were. Here's the Chicago Fire Department in action. And the firefighters came, from the community. So they were, friends, neighbors, relatives. And so really cool to have a set of cards that kind of would notice that and honor that to collect with. Here's floodlights at a scene. Looks like a big building or a big store. Special trucks equipped with floodlights are often used to illuminate the fire scene using heavy-duty generators. Here's rescuing an injured fireman, putting the ladder up and going in there. Stop, drop, and roll. Some suggestions there that they're providing. And here's a shower of flaming debris. Talks about the different pumpers and what kinds of physical forces a fire can have. This one was called too late. Looks like time could be a fireman's best friend or an enemy. And the fire already did a lot of work. Here's a factory fire that's out of control. And a hose company in action. That's where they have the water pumping through and out of the hoses and onto the fire. Here's escaping from a blown roof. And a foam attack on an auto trunk. That's to help keep the fire from both breathing and getting bigger and also keeping it from spreading. And here we have volunteers in action. And so they are fighting that fire. And next we have icicles everywhere. Firefighting in the freezing cold can be quite a challenge. Even though there's a huge fire nearby, winter brings its own challenges to firefighting, making a difficult job even more challenging. Fireman's view from the inside. And the tedious aftermath. So after the fire is out, there's still a lot of work to be done to keep the fire suppressed from starting again and from spreading. Fire at an abandoned building. And sometimes things happen in abandoned buildings that lead to fires that wouldn't typically happen if it was occupied or people were kind of coming and going on a frequent basis. Here are asbestos suits used for an oil fire. It's to help protect the firemen. Even though they look like spacemen, they're actually firemen. And here's a lumber yard that is ablaze. The New York Fire Department in action. And you can see the storefronts there. And the big city fire department. They have special problems given the buildings and the tight quarters and everything. And all right, so that was 1981. So now we're looking at the 1986 version of the firefighter cars, which is really cool because it means they probably had a series from 82 through 85. And I like that. So here's a routine day's work. Putting out a house fire. Looks like on the second floor. Definitely a difficult and dangerous job. Flaming twister. That's wild. It's almost like a fire tornado. It looks like these cards are different. I think the 81s, you flip them over that way. And then I think this, you gotta flip them over this way. Here we have a lonely climb. Heading up, you can see the roof is in flames. So they'll go and put that out. And they're training for that work. First on scene. You can see it's a heavy dark smoke, which can be indicative of what is burning. The smoke color can kind of be a clue as to what has been burning to create that smoke. And then the firefighters can use that knowledge to help determine a good approach to putting it out. Crawling low in heat. Generally heat rises, especially when you've got a fire producing a lot of heat. So this card talks about kitchen safety. And here we have a false alarm hazard. And looks like a little run in there. So preventing false alarms are crucial because then the resources can be used on real emergencies and real fires and things like that. So now we went from 81 to I think 86. Let's see what this yellow border is. This is 83. Perfect. This is the 1922 Aaron's Fox fire engine, one of the earlier models. And here's a 1976 Howe. You can see even from, not even from 22 to 76, a huge change in size, functions, features. Here's a 1976 Ward. Started to see more of that yellow paint. Actually, this is a good sequence. So you've got, usually they started out red, then as time went on, they developed the yellow. Then they kind of went to white a little bit, that same 76. And then I think they eventually went back to like a yellow-green. And but let's check it out. Here's a 78 Crown. And 1942 Mac. Mac's made, obviously, a lot of trucks, and so they were a reliable and strong manufacturer for fire trucks. 1915 White Aaron's Fox. And give some tips on keeping campfires under control. Now we're going back to the 1800s with our 1898 American fire engine. And look at that. This would be generally a horse-drawn wagon. Horses would attach up front. I'm sure if needed, it could be pulled by hand as well. And this pumper up here would be kind of pushed up and down to create the water pressure that would force the water out. But it's a pretty big and a pretty fancy hand pumper. And here's another of the more recent set. This is called Moving In from the 86 version. And here we go. From the 86 version, we have Santa Claus talking about holiday safety and Christmas safety. Keep everybody safe and having a good time during the holidays. And back to the more recent one, we have the 78 Mac, a blue color. That's a very relatively rare color for fire engines. 1958 Seagrave. 1981 Han. They're mentioning about crawling low in smoke on the back there. 1937 Seagrave. You could see from the 20s into the 30s, You started to move more from the kind of steam powered more to the engine, you know, automobile kind of driven engines. And a fireboat at Pier Blaze. Fireboats are very important, especially in coastal cities like New York, and they could do a lot of positive things helping because they are in the water with a near infinite amount of water and can then project that water on shore or on piers or other boats and help put those out. Here we have a brush fire. They can move and change direction very quickly based where the wind is going. And if the brush is very dry, then that could lead to a very challenging fire for the firefighters, because just as the wind can change, so can the direction of fire, both away and towards them. So something to be very aware of when they're out there in conditions like that. And here are toxic fumes and hazards. Talking about installing smoke detectors. And here we have the 1980 Oshkosh. That looks like a very powerful stream there. And 2,500 gallons per minute capacity. There's the specs on the back of the cards for trucks like that. Carries 6,300 gallons of water and 515 gallons of foam. That looks like pretty serious business. Here we have the lumber fuels blaze. It's basically the wood lumber yard, and it is on fire. And it talks about the fire triangle. 3 things that must be present are oxygen, which is air, fuel, and heat. And so those are the things that help create and sustain a fire. Oxygen, fuel, and heat. It's part of the fire triangle. Cigarettes and carelessness can lead to big fires, especially in the 80s and 90s when smoking was a much more popular activity. Here we have a 1980 Pierce, kind of your classic fire truck with your ladder on top and all the ladders on the side. There were usually fire engines and fire trucks. One had the hoses and the water. The other would have the ladders and the other equipment. Here's a 1924 Brockway LaFrance. And they mentioned stop, drop, and roll on the back. 1958 Seagrave. That's a pretty cool looking one. Talk about using electricity safely. 1937 Amera LaFrance, made by GMC. Looks very much like a 1930s engine. And the last one, we have a warehouse fire where all the firemen are fully involved. And it mentions talking about extension cord safety. So overall, there you have a look into the early and mid 80s firefighter cards. I think some of these are incredibly captivating in terms of, the fires they show, the machines they have, and also a good reminder to just always be aware, of fire safety, learning what we can, and appreciating the firemen that we have in our communities because they do a lot. So there you have it. I hope you learned something. Hope you had some fun. And until next time.